We're not talking about polar bears. We don't even get into environmentalism a lot of times. A lot of times we just say, hey, would your missions or your children's ministry or this soup kitchen, the things that are important to you, would they love to have an extra 10 or 20% bump in your budget? They're like, yeah, of course we would. And we say, okay, well, let's look at your power bills. And if we could just even put a small dent in that because of solar, what would you do with that extra money?
Welcome to Ecophonia. If saving the planet sounds a little bit daunting, it is. I feel that way too, so I'm talking with experts across industries and across the country to get to the root of how change is really made, in order to help you learn ways to make the world a better place. I'm here to investigate what really makes the biggest impact, and to connect you with real people who already have their feet on the ground. Today, I connected with Marqus Cole, the organizing director at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, also known as GIPL, an organization that equips people of faith to engage with climate issues. I had an extensive conversation with Marqus about connecting faith and environmentalism, advocacy hyper-specific to Georgia, but also beyond, and how communities can come together to make actual change. This interview was so extensive that I'm actually splitting this episode into 2 parts. Furthermore, today's part actually has 2 subparts. One, Marqus talks about how GIPL is partnering with houses of worship to make them greener, which is not only super cool, but has lessons you can apply to your life, whether you're a person of faith or not. And 2, if you're a resident of Georgia, I highly recommend the second half of this conversation, where we talk about the Public Service Commission, which controls the future of Georgia's energy. But if you're not a Georgia resident, Marqus still has some phenomenal nuggets about how to build a movement. To kick off this conversation, I asked Marqus both about himself and GIPL.
My name is Marqus Cole. I'm the organizing director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. That's a mouthful, so for most of our time chatting today, I'll just reference it as GIPL, which is how we're known in the community by a lot of folks. And my background as an organizing director really is, this is the first time this position's ever existed at GIPL. GIPL's never had an organizing director before. And so not only am I originating this opportunity, but really bringing all the things that I've learned in my past, both as a trial lawyer, as someone that's been on staff at a house of worship, as someone that served as the National Director of Church Engagement and Outreach for the Evangelical Environmental Network. I'm bringing that fullness of everything into this role that I've been in for about 16 months now.
Wow. Can you give me an elevator pitch to what GIPL is?
Yeah, so Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, GIPL, really aims to connect faith, community, and people together. And our mission, which I'll share, because I think there are a couple important things in there, we seek to inspire and equip communities of faith to organize, implement practical climate solutions, and do advocacy across Georgia. And our issues really are climate change, environmental justice, and community resilience. And so the reason I go with the kind of long mission statement for the elevator pitch is because there are a couple things to note. Inspire and equip. So yes, we want to have high vision and dreams, but we also want to get real practical and give folks tools. And really for us, it's organizing, practical climate solutions. We'll talk about some of our programs, and then the advocacy piece, which are really the secret sauce that we like to bring to our communities.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to get into the advocacy portion. But I guess just one more little piece about you. What personally inspired you to join GIPL? And sort of how does your background inform your approach to environmental advocacy?
Yeah, so one of the main things to know about GIPL in Georgia, and quite honestly, nationally as well, is that GIPL is kind of known as the player at the intersection of faith and policy when it comes to environmental justice and when it comes to really climate change and practical climate solutions in the South. So GIPL has a several decade-long history of doing practical climate solutions. And what I found and what got me excited about taking on this new role is that GIPL is a trusted partner and name with policymakers on both sides of the aisle. And we work here in Georgia, which, depending on when you're listening to this, may have voted blue, may have voted red, may have voted purple. Georgia's in this really interesting hinge position on environmental issues where Governor Kemp wants us to be the EV capital of the world. And at the same time, there are folks that have values that would align with environmental policies, but maybe for political identity reasons, don't vote that way. And so it can be quite a growth, opportunity, and challenge to do the work that we do in faith communities here. So one of the things that really excites me about what I get to do in my role is, as a former trial lawyer, I spend a lot of my time taking very complicated things, facts, laws, witnesses, testimony, and telling a story that simplifies it in a way that a jury or a judge can really understand. And something that's important about that skill, and I think people get wrong about lawyers all the time, is ultimately the lawyers don't decide what to do. It's a judge or a jury. So it is important to know the facts and know the story and tell that well, but there is a bit of letting go of, I've done the best I can do, and then I'm going to leave it to you to decide. And in my role as organizing director, whether I'm working with policymakers or I'm working with folks in a congregation, a lot of what I'm doing is marshaling stories and facts and figures and laying it before the congregation or laying it before the policymaker and saying, hey, ultimately, this is as far as I can go, and I hope that you do the right thing with this information. And what we have found over and over again when we talk to policymakers or when we talk to people of faith is that folks' position can change if you come with the right posture. And so later on in our conversation, we'll talk about positions and posture. But I want to go ahead and seed that pretty early, that was a really important skill that I wanted to bring to this work.
No, I love that metaphor. We will absolutely dive into more of that in a little bit, but I do first want to kind of cover a lot of the different sort of programs and initiatives that GIPL has. So if we could just do like almost like a little nice rapid fire, what your guys' programs are, and then sort of what the impacts have been, and how people can sort of take those lessons and apply them to their real lives.
Yeah, let's dive right in.
So I guess just sort of to get it started, you guys, a lot of your initiatives are partnered or inspired by Drawdown, Georgia. Can you sort of talk about who they are and why you guys have sort of partnered with them?
Yeah, Drawdown, Georgia is one of our best partners. I talked about taking data and figures earlier, and Drawdown, Georgia has really crunched the numbers, right? They've taken all the suite of tools and activities and practical climate solutions that a person or organization can do, and they offer these tiers or bands of actions that you can take. And oftentimes it starts with what people call the low-hanging fruit, things that are easily dispatchable or deployable that have a big bang for their buck. And most folks listening will probably know, like, changing your light bulb. Like, that's a key one that we always tell people and we help them with. So from something as small as changing your light bulb is going all the way up to a heat pump HVAC system or replacing hot water heaters, solar batteries. Like, we could talk about all of that. But I think what's really important about the way that GIPL goes about practical climate solutions, and I wanted to share this with your audience, is a lot of times folks come to us and ask, what do I do? They have a what do I do question. Is this the right thing to do? Is that a bad thing to do? Should I buy this or should I buy that? And I like to help folks refrain from that question. Before we get to the do question, let's talk about how we should be, right? Be in relationship with the things we own, the things we use. And oftentimes what I would tell folks is, given what you have and what you need, how can you, in a way that's really less wasteful, do what it is that you want to do? So people want to talk about the do question. But first we have to step back and just kind of say, what do you have? What do you actually need? And how can you be in relationship with that in a way that's less wasteful? And then what you'll see when it comes to the drawdown opportunities and some of the programs we'll talk about is the key of it is knowing how much energy are we using, how much water are we using, how much waste are we throwing away? And then asking this real, almost spiritual question of what do we actually need? And capitalism and materialism might offer a suggestion to you. You need the newest, greatest, brightest, always, right now. But working in faith communities, what we tend to help folks find out, Anna, is that they actually don't need as much as they thought they did. And once we get to what the need is and what they have, we find that there are some practical climate solutions that we can implement that really lower the amount of waste that people put out.
I love that. So I guess let's kind of sort of dive into some of these things. So, I mean, one of the things is your green teams. What are they? And what's like a success story from one of your green teams?
Yeah, so green teams really are the backbone of GIPL, not just our organizing and advocacy, but also our practical climate solutions. And what we would say of our green teams are they're 3 or more folks of faith or in a community or congregation that really have strong values for caring for the earth, doing environmental justice work, working on the climate crisis. And when those 2 or 3 people gather together and form a team, they can choose to work alongside us at GIPL and have us work alongside them. And so there are a couple of things that those green teams do regularly, some rhythms of their life, including meeting regularly. Oftentimes it's every month, every other month. They do programs together, whether those are river cleanups or they're doing, waste events. So there's a component of activity, doing things together. And one of the biggest things that green teams do is bring awareness and advocacy to their own community first. We don't usually take green teams straight down to the Capitol or to Washington, D.C. Usually their most influence and their most power is around their congregation, their synagogue, their masjid, their community center, and saying, we care about this. We want to do something about this, and we want to put our hands and our feet and our wallets to that project. Can we help? And we found that to be a really, really successful model. Instead of us as GIPL, as the outsider coming in as the expert, folks tend to ruffle their feathers a little bit. Instead, we train and equip green team leaders to work in their communities to do the things that are important to their community.
That's awesome. I think the hyper-local approach is super important. So do you have any success stories from maybe a green team of how they made an impact in their community?
Yeah, there are so many stories. And really one of the things I would say about green teams, and I was in Athens, Georgia, not too long ago with Oconee UMC, and we were talking about doing pollinator gardens, right? Like they're really excited about rewilding, and they had already done WaterWise program, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit. But what they wanted to do, and the reason this comes to mind right now, is they didn't want to just do a project by themselves. So they brought in another church, they brought in young people from Athens, Georgia, and just folks from a local neighborhood. And we had about 40 or 50 people in a church basement, shared some meal together in reusable bowls, tried to reduce our waste as we ate. And through this program, we really helped discern for that community themselves, what would it look like to do a rewilding project, right? Whether that's putting in a pollinator garden, whether that's just taking out invasive species, planting fruit trees. And so at the end of that meeting, some of those folks came down to our Green Team Summit and really enjoyed that, where we get about 500 people together. I think it was over 300 this year. And now they're going to be applying for one of our rewilding grants so that we'll get to work with them, technical assistance, provide some funds, and they will, if they apply and get the grant, be able to do what they had already been dreaming about doing. And it's just a really great way that our green teams come alongside our programs.
That's awesome. So you had mentioned the WaterWise program. So what is that, and what have your successes been with it?
Yeah, WaterWise, W-I-S-E, and you hear that WISE over and over again over the next couple of minutes, I'm sure, really goes back to that core philosophy I was talking about. What do we have? What do we need? And so we come in with experts, folks that can do audits and help a congregation or a community discern how much are we using, right? How much do we have on hand? How much do we actually need? In a lot of these facilities, especially some of the buildings we work with, they're churches that have been around 30, 40, 50, 70 years. The dishwasher isn't an Energy Star appliance, right? The toilets aren't low flow toilets. So I mentioned this earlier, there's some just low hanging fruit, upgrading appliances, bringing them into our current standards that are really good. But then there are other things like lawn care and maintenance, right? We're in Georgia, and the summer folks like to run those sprinklers and get that grass looking real green. One thing that we are able to do is help folks see how much water you're actually using and can you maybe reduce it. And that's just a great entry for a lot of folks to be the stewards they want to be anyway, but may just not have the technical assistance that they need.
Awesome. So have you guys found great success just taking that low-hanging fruit and then improving their efficiencies?
We have, and one of the things we've actually found is that for most congregations or synagogues or masjids or other kind of buildings that folks are meeting in as people of faith, There's usually a core set of things that they can do. So while we will send an auditor in if there's a really specific, case and there might be something that catches us off guard, usually there's about 4 or 5 key things that most folks can do in facilities of that type that really help. You might already be thinking of them having automatic sensors for water, right? So if a person's hand's not there, the water goes off. That's a low-hanging fruit type of intervention, but will pay dividends over days and months and years. And so those types of things we typically know are going to be things we can recommend to folks do. And again, a lot of this comes right from our friends at Drawdown, Georgia. These are not things that are rocket science or folks don't know, but usually they don't know how to apply them.
So I guess switching gears just a little bit, let's talk about the SolarWise initiative. I imagine it's very similar, but comes with solar instead of water.
Yeah, it is. And solar really is the cutting edge of some of the practical climate solutions that we get a chance to help congregations come alongside and implement. And what I would say with solar, and this is so interesting over the past 3 or 4 years, and many of your viewers or listeners may know this already, the price for solar is falling so quickly because the technology is changing so rapidly, or maybe changing isn't even the right word, Anna. Maybe it's maturing. As this industry matures, and here in Georgia, we have Q cells coming because of some of the policies with the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. By incentivizing solar, renewables, and batteries, congregations and communities of faith really have the right type of portfolio, or maybe even we'd say it, patterns of behavior that make solar a really optimal choice for them. There are a couple of challenges, and we might talk about those, but from the get-go, helping congregations see that roof that they have already that they just repaired is a great place to gather energy every single day and then reduce their power bills because of that is a game changer. We're not talking about polar bears. We don't even get into environmentalism a lot of times. A lot of times we just say, hey, would your missions or your children's ministry or this soup kitchen, the things that are important to you, would they love to have an extra 10 or 20% bump in your budget? They're like, yeah, of course we would. And we say, okay, well, let's look at your power bills. Let's look at how much you're paying to cool your facility in the summer, heat your facility in the winter. And if we could just even put a small dent in that because of solar and programs like the Georgia Bright program, what would you do with that extra money? And they say, we would do the things we're passionate about. It's like, well, yeah, let's do the things you're passionate about instead of giving your money to Georgia Power or somebody else. And so that SolarWise program really helps communities and congregations see the value of renewable energy. And it's really critical. Sometimes we talk about resilience, building in resilience in the community, and we can talk more about that. Usually that comes with solar and battery. But one of the key things that we love about our solar program here is that when folks pull up to their house of worship on whatever their holy day is, and they see those panels, it kind of serves as a bit of a witness that actually this isn't some future off thing, but right now we can live in a different type of way that cares for our community.
That's incredible. So I guess you mentioned that there might be some challenges with that. Could you dive into maybe what some of the challenges are? Because clearly there's the savings that they would have a great impact to all their initiatives that they would, like to keep forward. So what stands in the way of that?
Yeah, one of the key factors that stands in the way of houses of worship moving towards solar and renewables is just a lack of information. Most houses of worship have, whether it's a small staff or a big staff, don't tend to have an electrical engineer on staff. They don't tend to have an environmentalist person full-time on staff. And so to get the right information, the right programs, the right panels even requires a little bit of technical assistance. And so while I don't want to suggest that GIPL is the only person in town doing this, we have friends like Green the Church that are coming to Georgia and they have experience in other states. GIPL has built relational capacity in communities, and we'll maybe talk about some of the churches that we've worked with. But for instance, we worked with a lot of Methodist churches. So if one gets solar panels and then they go to their annual convening and they talk about it, it goes back to what we talked about with the green teams. There's relational trust with people within the community, and they say, hey, we worked with GIPL. this worked well. We saw our bills come down, and it's a great way to be a steward. And then this other sister congregation says, hey, we're interested in that. They can afford that. We want that. We can do that too. And we start to see that happen. It's a really beautiful piece, but the challenge is helping folks get that information. So that's one. And I don't want to pretend like there aren't policy challenges either. I mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law. I mentioned Inflation Reduction Act, trying to get all these acronyms together. There was real policy momentum at the federal level. And I've talked about Georgia and Governor Kemp's push for the EV capital at the state level and even locally to move into renewables and being more resilient. But with the shifting nature at the federal level of policies for things like direct pay and folks not knowing if rebates are going to be there, it does have a bit of a chilling effect on some of those upgrades. And we'll talk about power-wise in a second. But what I'll say is there were federal dollars meant to flow to Georgia, and the acronym we call it is GIFA, G-E-F-A. But essentially, there was going to be a state program that stewarded federal dollars for things like appliances and paid out. And houses of worship and 501c3s, not-for-profits, were going to be able to use that money. But then they weren't sure if they were going to be able to. And so then it literally froze and chilled people. And just a week ago, since at the time that you and I are recording, Anna, GIFA said, actually, go ahead, submit. We're going to pay you. We have the funds. And so we're going to see some of those rebates and appliances roll out. But policy matters, and policy can accelerate or policy can decelerate the change to renewables. But it's important that your folks know policy won't stop the transition to renewables because renewables are the best game in town. This is where we're going as a community and a culture. And I think your listeners hopefully will know not just that there's light at the end of the tunnel, but the light is getting brighter. Like whether it's science, whether it's engineering, whether it's business, there are real reasons why the shift to renewables is going to happen. And not just 2 generations from now, but folks that are living now will look back on this time period and really have 2 questions. 1, why didn't you do this faster? And 2, why did we let people that were making billions of dollars harming our environment and harming us lead for so long? Those will really be the only 2 questions at the end of the century when it comes to how we power our communities.
Amazing. So let's talk about the PowerWise program, because you brought that up in the last one. So, I mean, what is it and what have your successes been?
Yeah, PowerWise program, if green teams are our backbone, then PowerWise is the muscles. That is what really moves energy through our GIPL community. In PowerWise, yes, it's the light bulbs. We want to come in and do energy audits and those old 80s halo tubes you have up there. Let's maybe look at some LEDs. So yes, there is some of that, and automatic sensors in bathrooms. But one of the biggest opportunities that congregations have really is in their HVAC systems, right? And many of us know this from our own power bills at home. When it's hot in the summer, you got to cool that building off. And when it's cold in the winter, you have to power that. And so many congregations still have legacy systems, right? Whether that's furnaces that burn methane, or maybe, their steam or something else like that. We want to help electrify the power that's being used in houses of worship. We want to reduce the thermal envelope. So whether that's insulation, maybe putting new windows in, things like that. So we want cleaner energy coming in the building, electrified energy. We want to keep that energy in the building, and then we want to use less of the energy. So the PowerWise program is really built around those 3 pillars. How do we electrify to get cleaner energy in? How do we reduce the amount of energy needed? And then how do we keep that energy in the building? And I mentioned this earlier, and it's worth pointing out, the profile of houses of worship tend to be people use the buildings during the daytime, not at nighttime, which is great because that's when the sun is out, when there's solar, and they don't tend to be there very long. Unlike your house or your home or your apartment, folks aren't there all day. They're there for a few hours a day during the week, and then a really intense time over the weekend or the day of worship. And so we know with solar and battery, we can meet much of that demand for when there is demand. And when there's not demand, we can really reduce the thermal envelope. We can reduce the amount of energy that house of worship needs when people aren't there.
Clearly, that's huge. It's good for the planet. I mean, it lines up with when they're there. And I imagine it also has big cost savings for them as well. If you're not losing as much, with better insulation or through your windows or stuff. So, I mean, have you found that this has made a big impact on these communities that you're serving?
Yeah, it's made a huge impact, and your listeners can go to GIPL.org, GIPL.org, and see case studies and kind of get the profiles for themselves. You talked about reducing the cost on the bill, and that's important, right? For most folks, the primary way that they know that they're saving is through their power bill every month, and that's critical. Unlike me as a home consumer, or you or others that are in apartments, houses of worship have a really cool feature that most other folks can't take advantage of, which is time, a timeline. A house of worship that's going to be there for 40 years, 50 years, savings may seem small on a daily or monthly basis, but that compounds over years and decades. So moving to energy efficient appliances, yes, it's going to knock $50 off your monthly bill, but over the span of decades, the amount of energy that we can help folks save, that's the really critical part. And that's what we'd like to help folks see, is that communities of faith are used to taking the long view. And so convincing them that this will pay off over 15, 20, 30 years tends to work better, because these are the types of institutions that will be around in 20 or 30 or 40 years.
So I guess, again, shifting gears, can we talk about zero waste?
Yeah, Zero Waste is one of our newer programs. It's a really cool program. And as we're recording, the season of Ramadan just ended for our Muslim brothers and sisters and neighbors. And so I can report to you all, you're getting this information almost real time live here, that over Ramadan, we helped fund and participate in 30 zero waste iftars. So that's the traditional dinner that breaks fast at the beginning of the evening. And we diverted over 300 pounds of waste from the landfill for our Ramadans. It was 30 iftars serving 5,000 people, 1,000 pounds composted. Now, again, that's food that was diverted from a landfill where it was going to create methane, leak into the air, composted, which means it's going to return to the earth in somebody's garden. And I love the Zero Waste program, because oftentimes we'll get to congregations or masjids and they say, maybe at home I could do better and maybe I should do better, but we have to feed 200 people, 300 people. There's no way that we can be sustainable in that. And as we just proved this season during Ramadan, actually, not only can you honor your faith tenets, which oftentimes include being good stewards, but you can do it in a way that's sustainable and good for the earth. And when we do these types of examples, it goes back to the solar panels. It's about being a witness. Yes, those individual masjids diverted things out of the landfill, they composted things, but now next Ramadan, they can tell their brothers and sisters, hey, it's actually possible to do that. And this brings up an important topic that we'll talk about when we get to policy and advocacy. GIPL's heart is actually not about addition, it's multiplication. And what I mean by that is every additional congregation we work with, it's great. Like I don't want to downplay growth by addition, but really what we want to do is train leaders and faith communities and equip them, to use this language of our mission, so that they can go talk to people, right? Because one imam that can talk to 10 of his people, he can get to more people than I can get to with the hours in my day. So it's really about empowering people to then go into their communities. And Zero Waste program really is built around that.
That's huge. I would love to dive more into the empowering program, or like the sort of empowering aspect of that. But maybe we will come back to that.
We'll circle back on that. It'll come back up.
We'll circle. So I guess let's just talk about the last one, right? The Rewilding program, which is also, from what I understand, a very new program.
Yeah, Rewilding is one of our newest programs. And really, the Rewilding program, when I go talk about it in the community, I like to talk about it this way. We're actually not rewilding the plants and the lawns and all of that. That's the project, that's the work of it. But what we're actually trying to do is change the people in their hearts, right? So bring them back to what their native way of being ought to be, and likely is based on their faith tradition. What I mean is that many faith traditions, when you actually sit down and you read the scriptures with them and you talk to them, there's a real shared sense of sacred earth, right? That whether we're talking to indigenous brothers and sisters about trees and the more than human world being the big brothers and sisters and humans coming later, whether you're talking in Jewish or Christian or Islamic faith about trees and the values of trees, whether that be the tree of life or the tree of knowing good and evil. But even in other traditions and faith, you think of the Buddha sitting under a tree. There's this real tight connection in story and values that the earth, we don't just live on it, but there's this relationship in that it sustains us and we sustain it. I mean, scientists will tell you what the trees respirate and give off oxygen we need to breathe. And funny enough, what do we respirate and exhaust? Carbon dioxide that the trees need, right? And so there's this relationship that's real and important. And so the Rewilding program is meant to help people catch that vision again. And so part of it is pollinator gardens, because we know how important pollinators are. And pollinators, I mean butterflies and bees and birds, and that our past 60 years of maybe monocultural grass lawns has not been the best for those pollinators. But even if it's not for the pollinators, oftentimes we talk about flooding in parking lots. Well, maybe that's because we've done a sheet of asphalt across our parking lot when before there were trees and there were root systems that could capture that water, soak that water back into the water table. So what does it mean to have a permeable driveway again, right? Maybe a gravel driveway. We talk about that. We talk about planting trees in urban areas to create shade. We talk about doing fruiting trees in other areas where it's appropriate. We talk about taking out invasive species and putting back in native plants from Georgia in those areas. And the whole menu of practical climate solutions, if I can use that word, is yes, to do something practically in your community, but two, to be that witness again. So folks see that and they put it out and they say, oh, when we visit your church, we see that you have this. Why did you do this? And kind of be a witness. And more importantly, so that folks in those communities of faith themselves, we want to rip out that invasive mindset and story that isn't natural to humans, that we're just here to do monocultural things and use, and not be a part of a reciprocal relationship with the ground we're on. We want to rewild people and put the actual story back into them.
I love that. So I guess maybe through all of this, there are all these different programs, you're creating witnesses to these environmental practices and to how they should have this relationship with the earth. Have you found that that has helped, I don't know, maybe change people's minds is not quite the right word, but give them a new perspective and keep them more open to hearing about other ways they can maybe help the earth?
Yeah, I would say changing their heart, right? And I think that's an important part of our conversation that hopefully your listeners and viewers will start to see out of this is, if you change a person's mind, and this is the organizer director in me, I get it. This is the thing that I say to people all the time, so now you're going to hear it too. If you change a person's mind, they can always change it back, right? If you try to brute force logic them into why they should drive the hybrid or the electric car, or why they should go out there and compost, and you try to guilt them into it, one, you likely won't be successful. But two, even if you are successful, as soon as they hit a little adversity or it starts to cost more than they see the value of it, they'll go back to their old lifestyle. Or three, if someone else with more relational capital than you comes by and convinces them that that's the wrong thing, they'll change their mind back to conform. But if you change a person's heart, if you make it so that they're, and these are words that I got from one of my friends, he's a pastor and he's a professor at Wesleyan. He talks about being commissionally convicted. If a person is commissionally convicted, that means they're so convicted that they feel like they cannot live out their faith values unless they're doing environmental, practical climate solutions. then nothing's going to change them back, right? You've changed their heart. I can't be a good follower of Muhammad. I can't be a good follower of Jesus. I can't do this. I can't be in right relationship with the earth unless. Once you have someone that has that in their being, then everything they do coming out of that will, to the extent that they have the resources or capacity or money or the privilege to do it, it will be in alignment with that being. And I think what you're starting to get out of some of these programs is just that ethos, right? How do we help folks change their being so that the things that they do with their resources are more energy efficient?
That's huge. I love that. So I guess let's start talking about some of the advocacy work, which is huge. So I know you have something upcoming called the Summer of Advocacy.
Yeah. Summer of Advocacy, the second annual Summer of Advocacy. We started with our inaugural one last summer. I mentioned I've only been in this role 15 months. So my first year, we started and launched our Summer of Advocacy, and now we're moving into our second year. And what I would say is the Summer of Advocacy is actually an outgrowth of the conversation we just had and your viewers have been listening to, which is if you change the way of being, then people will do things differently. And funny enough, they can't wait to tell other people about why they're doing what they're doing, right? And why they've made that change. And so Summer of Advocacy really is for those green team leaders, those communities of faith that have changed their way of being, that they've done new things at their congregation or their community, and now they want to tell policymakers why they did what they did. And so this Summer of Advocacy focuses on the Public Service Commission. We can spend a lot of time talking about that and what that means. But what I'll say is most folks don't know who their public service commissioner is, but they do flip a light switch on every morning. And so where they get their energy from, how they get their energy, and what that relationship is with their energy provider is all mediated through the Public Service Commission for the most part. And this summer, we want to not only inform people about that, but we want to raise their awareness. We want to do some direct action. And ultimately, we want to put pressure on policymakers to know that there are people of faith around the state of Georgia, that it's not a blue thing, it's not a red thing, it's not a tree hugger thing, it's not a liberal thing. I'm a Georgian, I'm a person of faith, and I think and I believe that our state is worth protecting and saving, empowering by clean energy. And so that's a little tidbit of what we'll be doing at Public Service Commission Summer of Advocacy this summer. And I'm happy to talk more about that.
Let's dive more into it. So, what is the Public Service Commission for people who don't know?
Yeah, the Public Service Commission currently is a panel of 5 folks that are elected across the entire state of Georgia, but they represent one district. Now, what I'm going to try desperately to resist is how that setup came to be as a legacy of Jim Crow and segregation and some other things. And I'll simply say what most of your folks might be aware of in the news recently, which is that setup that I just described, representing a district but elected statewide, was recently challenged in courts. And in fact, our public service commissioners have not had an election in years and years and years. So none of the 5 folks on the board have been voted on in the past 4 or 5 years. A couple of them have been appointed. Why is that important? Because over the past 4 years, we've seen 7 price hikes for bill payers that are Georgia Power bill payers. And the folks that are meant to serve the interests of the Georgia bill payers haven't been elected. So you're seeing your bill go up year after year because Georgia Power is putting in place policies that increase our bills year after year. And the people meant to be there mediating between us haven't been voted on and haven't regularly been hearing from people of faith or any Georgians because most folks don't know who public service commissioners are. And so you see it becomes really, really critical for us during the Summer of Advocacy to raise awareness. Let folks know, if you think your bill's too high, let me point you in the right direction of who you can talk to about that. And so we're kicking off our Summer of Advocacy doing just that in May with a virtual roundtable where we're gathering all of our green team leaders and others that want to join us from across the state in May, where we're going to have a virtual training. This is who the Public Service Commission, this is who they are, this is what they do. and here's how you can contact them, and we'll have a direct action right there where folks can take action. I want to talk more about that in a second, how people can take action, but it's really exciting that we're starting virtually in May so that people can get that information and take a quick action right then, right there on the spot with us live, or if they're watching the recording later, they can take action as soon as they watch that recording.
That's awesome. I do want to dive into how they can take direct action, but I just first want to ask, why hasn't there been an election in the past couple of years?
Yeah, so a couple of things have happened, and I talked about that lawsuit, and that lawsuit challenged the way in which public service commissioners are elected. And because of those lawsuits, the elections themselves were put on hold while it made its way through the court system. Where we are now is last General Assembly. So as we're talking, it's 2025. In 2024, the Georgia General Assembly reset those elections and when they're going to happen. I keep it taped to my desk because it's so important. We have elections that are going to happen in 2028, 2025, two of them that are happening this year, one in 2026, and then another one in 2028. So they're staggered out. But what's important to know is that two of those folks on the Public Service Commission were appointed by the governor, haven't stood for election in a while, and the others haven't had elections because of these court cases for years and years and years. So like they're beyond their term now. That doesn't make it illegal. It doesn't mean that the votes that they're making as public service commissions are invalid. Georgia has some laws that to protect us from that. But what it does mean is they haven't had to face their constituents in years. And some of them have never had to face constituents. And again, these are the folks mediating the policies for how we get our energy and what energy we get. And they're part of the reason why we've been seeing these bill increases. And we could talk about data centers and other things as well. But really, they're meant to be there for us, the Georgia residents.
So I imagine with elections, two of them happening this year, that is part of the reason for your summer of advocacy.
Yeah, we have this really interesting time we're in right now. So we talked about elections for the first time happening in years. There's also, parallel to that, an IRP process going on. IRP, that's Integrated Resource Plan. Every 3 years, Georgia Power has to come back to these public service commissioners and say, this is our 20-year forecast for what we think the energy demand will be and how we want to meet that demand. And Georgia Power, unfortunately, in this IRP in 2025, the same time two public service commissioners are up for election, are walking back some very important promises that they made to the public service commissioners, and probably more urgently, they made to us as Georgia residents. Specifically, power plants that they said they were going to retire in 2034 and 2036, they're now saying, actually, not only do we want to keep those on, but we want to power those into the second half of the century because we want to be able to meet the needs for data centers and AI. So again, this is important for your people to listen to. Georgia Power had said, not only did they not need these power plants, but they were going to retire these power plants. They've done a complete reversal and said, we need these dirty fossil fuel burning coal plants, and we want to extend the amount of time that they're going to be on the grid. That's going back on their word. And that's one of the most important things that I think people should know, whether they're listening here or they're coming to the Summer of Advocacy, is Georgia Power is not keeping their word to us.
Wow. I mean, that's clearly a big deal. So they, I guess, cite data centers as the reason they need more power. Is that, do you think there's truth behind it? Do you think they could be doing renewable instead? Do you think they're just trying to make more money? Where do you think it's coming from, their sort of 180?
Yeah, so there are a couple important pieces that folks know about the IRP process in Georgia Power specifically. And the first piece to know is that Georgia Power is a monopoly, a legal monopoly, but it is a monopoly in the state of Georgia. In their service areas, no one can compete with them when it comes to energy production and distribution. So right off the bat, you might be thinking, well, Georgia Power is a business and I run a business or my family runs a business. So I kind of get it. But actually, it's important to know that most businesses compete. There's a competitive process. And that helps keep things in balance, right? Supply and demand. We all kind of learn that. Georgia Power doesn't have that. Now, it is true that some of us in Georgia have a local EMC, which is like a co-op that might provide that power, or it might have a municipality. But it's important to remember Georgia Power is a monopoly. It is a monopoly. It's also important to know that Georgia Power, in addition to being monopoly, is guaranteed a profit. That means that no matter what they do, every year they're going to return a profit. Now, that profit can be bigger or smaller depending on what they do, but they are guaranteed a profit. And they pass the cost of fuel, how they make that energy, on to the bill payers. Why is that important? No one competes with them, so there's no competition on the price. They're guaranteed to make a profit. And then that brings us to the question of data centers. And so, here is a potential customer that's going to need a lot of energy. And here we are wanting to turn a big profit, and no one can compete with us. Let's see, what's the cheapest thing that we can do to create that energy to make that profit without investing heavily in renewables and green? Oh, we'll keep the coal plants open, right? Or, oh, we'll advocate to build another nuclear plant. And it's important for your viewers and your listeners to know it's not irrational. I might say it's illogical because it increases the climate crisis that we're in, which is going to mean more demand for energy. We'll get back to that in a second. But from Georgia Power's perspective, it actually makes sense. And that's why the Public Service Commission is so critical, because they're not supposed to have a profit margin in mind. They're supposed to have us in mind. And so the Summer of Advocacy, hopefully you can start to see, is folks of faith coming up and saying, again, I'm not Democrat or Republican, I'm not red or blue, I'm a Georgia bill payer, and I want you to do your job to protect us and to make sure that our energy is affordable, that it's available when we need it, and that it ensures that we're resilient. That's what we want. And Georgia Power just wants to make a buck. And so that's I want to tie all three of those together for your folks.
Yeah, that is huge. So I guess you talked about what are some direct forms of action that people can do about this?
Yeah, so one of the things we have, and it's again on GIPL.org, people can take action electronically. I'm holding here for your viewers that are with us a form that came from one of the churches that one of my colleagues was at this weekend. It was a Methodist church here in the metro Atlanta area. And there are 2 pages of signatures of folks that are taking comment with us at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, letting the Public Service Commission know that they say no to costly fossil fuels and yes to clean energy. So this is what you might call a grassroots petition, right? Probably many of your viewers and listeners have signed on to these types of petitions because they care about these types of things. And the value for this is that we can show by gathering hundreds and hundreds of these signatures here in the state of Georgia from people of faith that this is a bipartisan issue, that this is not a political issue, this is a policy question, right? How we energize our communities is a decision that we get to make. Coal does not fall from the heavens onto us and saying, burn me, burn me. Funny enough, sunlight does kind of fall from the sky though. And that price never goes up. The cost of sunlight never goes up. It's just there free to be harvested day after day. And so what we are asking folks to do with us as a direct action is to let the Public Service Commission know that that's something they're interested in. So that's a low stakes, high leverage opportunity for folks to get involved with us when it comes to advocacy. I'm sure we'll talk in a second about ramping up that spectrum, but if folks want to know something they can do right now, GIPL.org, as long as you're doing this before July 2025, when you find this podcast, go to that website, click on that Take Action link. We would love you to take action with us. And if you see someone like me in a sweatshirt or a t-shirt that says GIPL on it, we'll probably have one of these petitions with us inviting people to take action with us on that matter.
That's awesome. So let's talk about ramping it up. How can they ramp it up?
So a few weeks ago, I'm going to tell you an important story. I was invited by several students from Emory University, one of the premier colleges in Metro Atlanta area. And these young folks, it was about 12 of them, said, we heard about the Public Service Commission. We heard about this IRP process. We want to get involved, but we don't know what to do. So GIPL, myself and one of my colleagues went out there for an evening. We spent 2 hours with them doing a workshop on how to give public commentary. And just 2 weeks ago, at the time of this recording, on the first day of the IRP hearings, 13 students from Emory came down to the hearing room and gave testimony. Why do I tell you this story? Because we're going to talk about multiplication again. If I go give testimony, I am one person. But because I helped train people in the community, 13 of them were able to give testimony. And not just that they gave testimony, that testimony was picked up and broadcast across YouTube during the hearing. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the paper of record here in the South, picked up quotes from Ava, who was the leader of that group of students. It's run in the Current, it's run all over. So now, not only did they give testimony to those 5 public service commissioners, but it's been broadcast across the internet, it's been picked up in the paper and publicated. And some of those students, which are freshmen and sophomores, I talked about the 3-year timing of this IRP, will still be students 3 years from now when Georgia Power comes back. They can give testimony again, and they'll have more sophisticated tools. They will have done it before, and they can bring more people. That's the important part. So that giving of public commentary, we heard from the public service commissioners themselves how important it was to hear from people from the public and how their testimony was starkly different in character and texture than, yes, that of other climate activists, but even of the folks that were pro-Georgia Power. There was something very specific about the way that those students we trained gave their commentary. And this is important to say. It was their commentary. It was not GIPL's commentary. We trained them on how to give public comment. We helped them come up with a goal that's important to them, how to come up with that goal. But that goal was their goal, those 13 students and their testimony. And you can hear it when you listen to them. It was deeply personal and it was very, very moving.
Yeah. So I guess you said the commentary was different. Do you think it was that like deep personal connection that made it stand out so much? Or do you think it was something else? Was it one of the tools you gave them? Or like, what do you think really makes it so effective?
Yeah. So I think it was effective for a couple of key reasons. One was a tool that we gave them. And one of the tools we helped them understand is what's called a MAST goal, M-A-S-T. And some of your folks that do organizing that are listening might already know this, but I'll unpack it just a little bit. It's a goal that's meaningful, that's attainable, that it is specific, and it's time durated, right? So M-A-S-T. And by the time that they got down there to the hearings, their goal, and I actually mentioned those coal-fired plants earlier, was to have all of the coal-fired plants that Georgia Power uses offline by late 2030s. So essentially calling Georgia Power to honor their word. With a little bit of fine-tuning, that was their goal. And why that was so powerful was not that they were coming in kicking and screaming and saying, we should be 100% renewable right now. That's not attainable right now, given the current state of technology and the need. And I made this quote earlier, given what you have and what you need, how can you move in a way that's least wasteful, right? So we talked about that at the program level for congregations. It's also the case for us as a kind of culture and a society here in Georgia. Given our energy needs and given what we have, what's a goal that we can set that's meaningful, attainable, that's very specific and very time durated? And they chose that goal of closing down coal-fired plants. And so that was consistent across all of their testimony, which was really meaningful. They made a key decision that instead of doing a protest where they would do a visual demonstrable in the room, it would be more meaningful to just have young person after young person after young person give their testimony back to back so that it was a sustained message. And then they made a really, really important decision to ground their testimony in their identities as folks living in Georgia. It's not about their political persuasion. It's not about if they're part of this group or that group. And though they mentioned what school they went to and what majors they were, many of them started or ended with the idea that they were Georgians who loved Georgia or loved being here in Georgia and wanted to see it flourish.
I love that. So I guess also just talking a little bit of this multiplying effect. What do you think is the most effective way to get people to sort of become these multipliers?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. And as the organizing director, I wish I could pull out our whiteboard and we can go together and talk about organizing philosophies. One of the things I'll say though, Anna, is there's no right way or wrong way to organize, but there is certainly the way that we do it at GIPL and some of the skills that I bring. And one of the things that I brought from a mentor of mine is really this idea of the multiplication funnel, right? Multiplication funnel. Oftentimes what you see is folks organizing through what's called an assimilation funnel. So assimilation funnel starts really wide and then gets narrow. And what that looks like is you broadcast your message or whatever your policy, your values are to as many people as possible. So they are attending whatever the thing is that you're doing. And then a smaller subset of those people that attend connect with what you're saying. And they like, oh, okay, this is cool. But then an even smaller subset of that have the time and energy and passion to serve. And this is important. They're serving your purposes. And again, I don't want to suggest that there's a right way or a wrong way to organize, but what I will say is that assimilation funnel way of organizing has diminishing returns. It takes a lot of resources to broadcast as widely as possible, only for some of those people to connect with your message and an even smaller amount of folks to serve. And because they're serving you, you always need more people in the funnel because eventually they get tired of serving or life catches up and they can't do it anymore. I want to draw a contrast with this multiplication funnel, which starts very, very small. You use the word hyperlocal. Who are the people around me right now that I can influence? We talked about green team leaders, 2 or 3 people that are listening to us, that we have relationship with, that we share values. They listen, and then they can help others learn in their community. So this 2 or 3 can train 10 or 12 in their community. And then we send out those 10 or 12 to reach thousands. And I'm not joking. 2 of us, myself and my colleague Megan, went to Emory at a library at night to train 12 people. Those 12 people went out and talked to a room full of folks. So not just the 5 public service commissioners, but the 100 or so that were there in the room. And then I mentioned this, that YouTube stream went out, and I know the circulation of the AJC and other newspapers, hundreds of thousands. So we have the assimilation funnel and the multiplication funnel. Why am I harping on this? I'm one person. If I gave testimony, it would be for 3 minutes and I couldn't reach thousands of people by myself. I spent 2 hours, my colleague and I, 2 of us spent 2 hours, so that's 4 hours total, training 12 to 13 people that then went out and gave that testimony. That's the power of the multiplication funnel. And that's why we organize using that, because hundreds of thousands of folks have now heard the commentary of these young people speaking powerfully and prophetically about the need for renewables. And that is so much better than just me talking for 2 or 3 minutes and me doing that time after time after time. Addition's great. Addition's fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but multiplication's more powerful.
That's great. And those are actually like opposite shapes almost. So you have the big one coming down and then you have the small one going up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you see with the multiplication funnel, and again, I don't want to deride the assimilation funnel. There is value in that, and oftentimes we use it sometimes too. But one of the things that we always focus on at GIPL and that I bring as the organizing director is the serving that happens has to be us serving the communities. It can't be the community serving GIPL's needs, because that gets the relationship backwards. And so when we are serving folks that kind of get to us through the assimilation funnel, then they start to listen to us. And then they're ready to learn. And then they're ready to leave and go out there. And that's key. Many of the folks that are going to be listening to my voice through this podcast got to me through the assimilation funnel. I didn't sit down and do anything magical. But my hope is, after hearing what I'm saying and hearing how GIPL serves communities, they might reach out to us online or comment on the podcast or reach out to me, Marqus@gipl.org, Marqus, and say, hey, I heard this, I was listening, and I want to learn more.
That's awesome. And then I guess just with the multiplication funnel as well, I mean, how do you make sure that your message is effective enough? So if you're going to spend 2 hours with people talking to them, how do you know that they're then going to go out and talk to more people about it? Or how can you sort of better prepare yourself or better tailor your message, or so that they then actually multiply?
Yeah, that's a great question. One response, and this is an important response, is trust. I trust that the work that I do is meaningful. I trust that when I share my heart with people about why I do what I do, it's going to make an impact. Like right now, I don't know who's on the other side of these earbuds listening to this conversation. I don't know who's on the other side of the screen that clicked in to see this interview, but I trust that it will touch them and some of those people will come back. So that's the first piece. Second is we try to do our organizing in a way that's bottom up. And so what I mean by that is I don't tell people what they have to do or even should do. I share with them what they could do. And usually we have found when you share with people what they could do and they're passionate about something and they do the thing they're passionate about, they're going to go do it. I don't have to cajole them. I don't have to use a stick. I don't even really have to use a carrot. I just offer them relationship and I offer them opportunity, and the folks that want to take it up, take it up. In communities of faith that I often work with, there's a story, especially in the Christian community, that when Jesus sent out his disciples, whether it was the 12 he initially sent or sending out the 70 earlier or later, he tells them, don't take much. Just take your staff and your clothes, and you're going to run into people of peace, right? People of peace. Now, he's clear with them. You're going to run into some towns where they don't want you. They don't think what you're doing is important. Shake off your sandals, keep moving. But sometimes you're going to come and you're going to meet a person of peace that's going to invite you into their house, and they're going to take care of you, and they're going to give you what you need. Now, yes, it goes back to the trust, but there's something about going to the people of peace, the people that are ready to hear what you have to say, that when they hear what you have to say, they're going to take it and do what they're meant to do with it. And so this is where we kind of rub up, and I talked earlier about that rewilding of people. Our current culture tells us to be on the grind and to make and to do, and you have to do all this. I think there's another story we can tap into, though, one that's of relationship and reciprocity. I want to give you this, not for profit or for me to get anything out of it, but it's because it's meant for you. And then you go do with that what you're supposed to do, and I don't have to control you or control that. And I think when people hear that, it's a little weird because we're not used to hearing that, but it also feels true, right? Like not just right, but it feels true. And when people hear that truth, they tend to want to be involved with that.
What's almost like the call to action? What do you kind of want people to be like, if they want to go make a comment or if they want to get involved, what are they advocating for as opposed to Georgia Power's plan to, build another plant?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think, so there's the call to action that GIPL has, and then there is the ask that any person can make or could make, right? So GIPL's call to action is for folks of faith or people that share values with us to make public comment. So whether that's with us through the grassroots petition or going down in person to make a comment or sharing and amplifying our message on social media, if that's something that people want to do, the call to action is to be in relationship with us as we address the Public Service Commission. Now, the ask that people make, and I mentioned the students asked to shut down coal-fired plants based on their research and their resources and what they thought best. That was the ask that they came up with. There's an important thing for folks to know. I mentioned that every 3 years, Georgia Power comes back before the Public Service Commission. I would encourage folks to think of their ask, and we talked about the longer time horizons that houses of worship have. As communities of faith, folks are kind of wired up and dispositioned to take the long view already for spiritual reasons. I would say the ask should probably have some of that flavor, some of that dimension. It's not just that we're asking you to do something in 2025 or 28, that's 3 years after, or here's where my math starts to get bad and why I'm a lawyer and not an engineer. Was that 2031, they'll be back, 2034, they'll be back? Is that the ask of the Public Service Commission is not just for this IRP, but it's to set this IRP within a context and a trajectory of where we want to go. And so here's what I mean by that, right? I give this example all the time. 2034, 2036. These are two important numbers. Why are these numbers important? 2034 is when my oldest daughter graduates from high school, and 2036 is when my youngest daughter graduates from high school. 2034 and 2036 feels so far off for me with my elementary age school daughters. And it may seem so far off for you as a public service commissioner who may or may not even be here. And Georgia Power is going to have 4 more IRPs before then. But what I know about watching my daughters grow up, and what we know about all of us that have gone through high school, is that eventually that date comes. And if you're not prepared for that date, that's when all types of anxieties can come up and questions about what do I do next. I want folks preparing for 2034 and 2036, not just this IRP, but the IRPs that are coming later. I want by the time that IRP comes, that we're already on a sustainable trajectory to renewables, empowering our community with green renewables and battery storage. I just kind of did a little bit of that 2-minute public commentary right there, but I want people to see how effective it is to use personal story. You don't have to know megawatt hours. You don't have to know the energy efficiency of a solar panel. You can know that your kids or your grandkids, that your power bill's too high, that you want to leave something better, that you want to be a good steward, that people should be over profit. Things that all of us know just listening, you can go get public commentary on that. And the ask of the Public Service Commission can be specific to your context and your values.
I'd like to thank Marqus for taking the time to be interviewed. Now, I'm about to come at you with a bunch of dates. If you're listening before May 20th, 2025, please go check out GIPL's virtual kickoff for their Summer of Advocacy. And if you're listening before June 8th, please go check out GIPL's in-person Power Hours in Columbus, Georgia. These are both related to the upcoming Public Service Commission elections, and the links for both events will be in the description. Also, if you're listening to this after May 20th, 2025, congrats, part 2 of this conversation is now available. If you're before that date, don't worry, you can go ahead and hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss part 2. In part 2, we talk about how faith and climate can, should, and do work together, which I think is super eye-opening. If you would like to connect with GIPL, their information will be in the description. If you're on YouTube or Spotify, go ahead and drop a comment about what you found most enlightening about this conversation. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, please rate this show 5 stars as it really helps me out. And I will see all of you in the next episode.